Hello and welcome back to the Candid Canvas podcast. I am your host, Julie Siegrist, the owner and artist of Juliana Studios, and I am so happy to have you back with me talking more about women in art throughout history. This is part 3 of the series, and we are just about to enter into the 20th century, which has so many different movements in it. So I am excited to jump right in. But before we do, a little housekeeping. I want to remind you that you can find me here on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram at Candid Canvas Pod. And you can also hop on over to the Julianet Studios Patreon. And there's a specific tier for Candid Canvas listeners called the Candid Canvas Crew, where you can subscribe for only $3 a month to help support the podcast and keep the lights on here, as well as get access to guides for this podcast series specifically, where you get to actually see some of the artworks and masterpieces created by the artists that I'm about to talk about, as well as short synopsises of each era. So, for your own edification, you can pop on over and get access to those, or in the Patreon shop, you can purchase them individually if you prefer. So, with that, we are going to jump in to 20th century, which has a lot of stuff going on in it if you don't remember. The first half of the 20th century includes 2 world wars, a Great Depression, and a significant redistribution of global power. So, a lot of inspiration for art right at the top. The fragmentation of the world order also changed the art world. The disenchantment with previous academic styles led artists to experimentation and innovation, developing new modes of expression based on their personal experiences. Art Nouveau was the rage, an international style of art, architecture, and applied art, especially the decorative arts, was often inspired by natural forms such as the sinuous curves of plants and flowers. This style was popular between 1890 and 1910 and was a reaction against the academicism, eclecticism, and historicism of 19th century architecture and decorative art. One major objective of Art Nouveau was to break down the traditional distinction between fine arts and applied arts. Alice Russell Glennie, an American painter and sculptor and graphic artist who lived and worked in Buffalo, New York, was a fixture of the thriving artistic scene. From 1893 to 1894 and 1903 to 1904, she served as president of the Buffalo Society of Artists. She studied under top teachers William Merritt Chase and Gustave Boulanger in both the US and France. She was considered one of the city's top artists, and today she is remembered for her Art Nouveau posters and magazine illustrations. A predominantly French art movement called Post-Impressionism emerged in 1886 as a reaction against Impressionism and its concern for the naturalistic depiction of light and color. It extended Impressionism while rejecting its limitations. Artists continued using vivid colors and a thick application of paint and real-life subject matter, but were more inclined to emphasize geometry. Due to this broad emphasis on more abstract qualities and symbolic meaning, post-impressionism can encompass sub-movements such as neo-impressionism, symbolism, pointillism, and cynicism. Emily Carr, a Canadian artist, was inspired by monumental art in villages of the First Nations and the landscapes of British Columbia. She was a vivid writer and chronicler of life in her surroundings. She was praised for her complete candor and strong pose. Clewick, her first book, won the Governor General's Literary Award for nonfiction. Carr's keynote paintings were not widely known in Canada at first, but her stature as one of Canada's most important artists continued to grow. Today, she is considered a cherished figure of Canadian arts and letters. Scholars and the public alike regard her as a Canadian national treasure, and she has been designated a National Historic Person and had a minor planet, 5688 Clewick, named after her anglicized native name. During the early 20th century in France, a groundbreaking art movement known as Fauvism emerged. This revolutionary movement dared to challenge the traditional techniques used by Impressionists and instead boldly emphasized the use of vibrant, intense colors straight from the tube. Artists brilliantly experimented with color to create a dynamic sense of movement and liveliness in their work. Although Fauvism and Expressionism may appear similar at first glance, they differ in their primary focus. While Fauvism placed great importance on the organization of their image, Expressionists were primarily concerned with the communication of emotions through their art. A Fauvist artist, Émilie Charmy, was a French woman whose life was marked with tragedy. After losing her parents in her teenage years, Emily was taken in by relatives in Lyon. Despite societal norms, Emily was determined to pursue her passion for art. Her early works mainly consisted of paintings of women in domestic settings or still lifes, which sold well. Emily longed to create art that fulfilled her artistic aspirations and expressed her innermost self. In 1903, she moved to Paris, where she became part of the Fauve artists headed by Matisse. Although she was associated with the artists in exhibitions, her work was hung separately, receiving little attention as a female painter. A French novelist stated, "Emily Charmy, it would appear, sees like a woman and paints like a man. From the one she takes grace, and from the other strength, and this is what makes her such a strange and powerful painter who holds our attention." The trend of European artists being dissatisfied with the Academy standards continues, and the style of the art community continued to change. Artists began experimenting with new ideas for the modern world and expanding cities. As part of a pre World War II change, Expressionism, including art, literature, theater, and music, fueled by young people from Germany and Russia pushing for change in the social and political structures, emerged. It continued until the 1930s when the National Socialists grew in power, a government rejecting Expressionism in all forms and condemning it as degenerate. Expressionism used bold colors and unusual forms to create expressive, exaggerated images. Instead of duplicating realistic images, the artists wanted to express inner feelings and used simple shapes and broad brushstrokes to illustrate their emotional ideas. Artist Gabriele Munter was a founding member of the Blue Rider group of the German Expressionists. She was born in Berlin and started drawing as a child. Trained in a local artist studio as an adult and attending the Demenschule and the Phalanx School, she learned to mark the canvas with a palette knife and use bright, bold colors. She developed her technique of painting landscapes using dark outlines and bright, unmixed colors. Munter hid much of her work and the other works of the Expressionists during World War II. The works hidden by Munter were never found, and later she gave the hidden works to a museum in Munich, saving a lot of masterpieces from being destroyed. She created her work plein air, working quickly, and was known to paint a piece in one day. One of the most influential design concepts of the 1900s was Cubism. The Cubist artist did not believe in the usual standards of how elements appeared in nature or concepts of proper perspective or foreshortening. Instead, they redefined the shapes and objects in their painting into geometric forms, pulled them apart, and reformed them into overlapping and interwoven sections, allowing different perspectives of the three-dimensional flatness of the surface, obscuring the concept of depth. Tamara de Lempicka was a Polish painter who spent her working life in France and the United States. Best known for her polished Art Deco portraits of aristocrats and the wealthy, and for her highly stylized paintings of nudes. Her style was a blend of late, refined Cubism and the neoclassical style. She was an active participant in the artistic and social life of Paris between the wars. Following the outbreak of World War II, she and her second husband moved to the US, and she painted celebrity portraits as well as still life and abstract paintings. In America, modernism reflected the worldwide changes in art based on the unique American culture. The movement, along with others in this period, aligned with the experiences of modern industrial existence. Artists rejected the realistic approach to art and moved to more abstraction and experimentation with color and shapes. Georgia O'Keeffe was born in Wisconsin on a wheat farm. Interested in art from an early age, she studied art in high school and attended the Art Institute of Chicago. There, she developed more abstract drawings to express her feelings. She was acknowledged as a very successful artist, well known for her oversized depiction of flowers. And although later in her life she suffered from vascular degeneration as her vision failed, she continued to paint images in her memory until she passed away at age 98. At the beginning of the new 20th century, the economies in the northern and midwestern states were booming, and African Americans in the South saw the opportunity for economic advancement, jobs, education, and a more tolerant environment. Harlem became a major cross disciplinary artistic center of African American artists, writers, and entertainers, developing one of the country's most crucial cultural movements, the Harlem Renaissance. The neighborhood bustled with African American owned and operated publishing houses and newspapers, music companies, playhouses, nightclubs, and cabarets. The literature, music, and fashion they created defined culture and cool for Black and white Americans alike and around the world. Laura Wheeler Waring was born in Connecticut. Her family ancestors had been active in anti slave events. Her father was a minister, and her mother was an artist and a graduate of Oberlin College. Graduating from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, she received a scholarship to study in Paris. After the war, she then went back to Paris and enrolled in one of the academies, starting to paint portraits. Her style changed, becoming more realistic with vibrant colors, and her portraits focused on prominent African Americans who achieved success across multiple disciplines and illustrated numerous magazine covers and articles. In 1919, a radical new design school opened in Weimar, Germany. The school's manifesto was, the school would be open to any person of good repute, regardless of age or sex, and even went on to clarify that there would be no differences between the fairer sex and the stronger sex in a time when women could not attend college. The main principles of Bauhaus were 1. No border between artist and craftsman. 2. The artist is an exalted craftsman. 3. Form follows function. 4. Complete work of art. 5. True materials. 6. Minimalism. 7. Emphasizes on technology. 8. Smart use of resources. 9. Simplicity and effectiveness. And 10. Constant development. Otti Berger was born in Croatia and enrolled in the Royal Academy of Arts and Crafts before continuing her studies at the Bauhaus in 1926. Heralded as one of the most talented weavers, she began experimenting with methodology and materials during the course of her studies at the Bauhaus, to eventually include plastic textiles intended for mass production. From 1916 to 1950, early artists began experimenting with surrealism and were for multiple countries, creating diverse and symbolic images emerging from the subconscious mind, a place of superior authenticity and the absence of control. Surrealist work was tense and sexual, based on hidden psychological forces in the subconscious. Imagery is the most distinguishable part of surrealism, often eccentric, weird, or bewildering, meant to make the viewer uncomfortable and challenge their general assumptions of imagery and art. One of the most prominent female surrealist artists is Frida Kahlo, but since she is such a well known name, I thought I would focus on another artist from this time. Dorothea Tanning, born in Illinois, wanted to pursue art, so she moved to Chicago and then New York in 1935. She worked as an illustrator initially in the fashion industry. A local gallery exhibited her work and introduced her to other surrealist artists, including Max Ernst, whom she later married. Tanning developed friendships with the other surrealist painters and writers, observing their methods as she taught herself the necessary skills. In 1940, a new art style emerged, starting radical new directions in art. The artists associated with the abstract expressionists were all different in look as they developed the concept of spontaneity and improvisation. Their work was dynamic and gestural, highly abstracted. Influenced by earlier Cubism, Dada, and Surrealist movements, the new movement also shifted the focus of the art world from Europe to New York after the war, and a new generation of artists. If the label of abstract expressionism means anything, it means painterliness, loose, rapid handling, or the look of it. Masses that blotted and fused instead of shapes that stayed distinct. Large and conspicuous rhythms, broken color, uneven saturations, or densities of paint. Exhibited brush, knife, or finger marks. Joan Mitchell, born in Chicago, attended classes at the Chicago Art Institute as a child and teenager. She earned a BFA and MFA before moving to New York. In the 1950s, Mitchell was part of the artists who spent time in bars and clubs discussing art as part of the abstract expressionist movement. Mitchell's work always remained abstract, usually on large, expansive panels. Landscapes were her primary source of inspiration. After the abstract expressionist movement, or rather, during the abstract expressionist movement, a new form based on the exploitation of illusions and different optical effects of how an image was perceived became its own movement. Short for optical art, op art was a style of abstraction challenging the viewer's visual acuity. The form was usually mathematically based, using repetitive color and arrangements to develop into vibrating, changing effects. Bridget Riley, born in London, studied at Cheltenham Ladies' College after the war, and also at Goldsmiths College and the Royal College of Art. Riley worked as an illustrator for an advertising agency when her father was seriously injured in a car accident, and she suffered a mental breakdown. Afterwards, she returned to London and taught art at a girls' school and explored different art styles. She experimented with figurative, impressionist, and pointillist styles before developing her signature style of op art in the 1960s. Focused on using black and white for her geometric patterns, creating images to disorient the eye into seeing movement and color. She thought of her work as inspired by nature, not in realistic forms. Instead, she said, "For me, nature is not landscape, but the dynamicism of visual forces, an event rather than appearance." Following op art, pop art emerged in England and the United States in the 50s. Breaking away from traditional art concepts, it incorporated ordinary objects, such as comic books and advertising used in mass culture. Following a period of experimentation and increased consumerism after the war, artists were inspired by the world around them to create art based on prevalent culture. Pop art artists linked their work to mass media such as film, television, cartoons, and everyday mass produced images, resulting in a style that blurred the lines between high class art and low class culture. Adele Weber, born in Tessie Pasternak in Illinois and adopted as an infant, was always interested in art as a child and went to museums in Chicago weekly. After high school, she studied art at Scripps College and UCLA, receiving bachelor's and master's degrees in art. After moving to New York, her first encounters were with galleries that did not take female artists. Weber took additional design classes at that time. Weber asked to audit classes at Hunter College, taught by Robert Motherwell. Motherwell responded to her saying that married women with children were not allowed because they do not continue painting after class. Weber was married with 2 children and continued to paint. In the 1960s, Weber created pop art before moving to the more photorealist methods in the 1970s. Weber's trademark was creating black silhouettes with bright backgrounds, either colored or patterned, using multiple types of media. Moving from New York westward towards San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area artists were generally abstract expressionists until a small group of artists redefined the figure and its concept, an idea linking them together as the Bay Area figurative artists. In San Francisco, the artists gathered in colleges or university environments, supporting each other through academia and teaching. Teaching art was, in fact, part of the West Coast culture for artists. They were not as influenced by the commercial marketplace, free to paint and experiment with diverse concepts. A core group of artists met weekly, exploring the figure's boundaries, the painting's special context, and the interconnections of lines, patterns, color, and human interactions with those elements. Henrietta Berk was born in Kansas and moved to San Francisco as a child. She studied art at San Francisco State College and the California College of Arts and Crafts. Berk employed many innumerable concepts using broad, heavy brushstrokes to apply the thick, brightly colored paint. Although she was well known as an artist of the movement, she remained somewhat elusive in the general world. A radical Italian art movement from the late 1960s to 1970s translated pour art referred to the signature exploration of a wide range of materials beyond the traditional ones of oil paint on canvas, bronze, or carved marble. Materials used by the artists include soil, rags, and twigs. In using such throwaway materials, they aim to challenge and disrupt the values of the commercialized contemporary gallery system. Marissa Merz, an Italian artist and sculptor in the late 60s, was the only female protagonist associated with the radical art povera movement. In 2013, she was awarded the Golden Lion for lifetime achievement at the Venice Biennale. In 1967, Merz had her first solo exhibition at the Gian Enzo Sperone Gallery in Turin, for which she made a folded aluminum foil installation. Her work continued to reflect many of the fundamental issues with which art povera artists are preoccupied, such as organic forms, subjectivity, and the use of lower forms of art, including crafts, and the relationship between art and life. Starting in New York, young artists challenged boundaries of traditional media, perceived emotions, and overt symbolism with an art form that became one of the basic art forms during the 1960s, using primary and sleek geometric contours without decorative embellishments. Minimalism artists reflected the socio-economic issues of the 1960s and rejected the establishment and formal hierarchies. They created pure, objective elements of simplistic shapes made from commercial materials. Minimalism artists seldom used traditional materials, instead incorporating methodologies found in commercial manufacturing and fabrication. Generally, the artists used house paint, cement, or fiberglass instead of oil paint, canvas, or clay. Carmen Herrera, born in Havana, Cuba, had a private art education when she was young, even attending school in Paris at 14. She studied architecture at the Universidad de La Habana for 1 year, quitting because of the continual fighting in the streets and the unstable ability of the university to remain open. She studied art in New York before moving to Paris. Refining her art, Herrera focused on her straight line, hard edge style, a technique she developed. Returning to New York, she continued to face rejection as an artist, a problem Herrera attributed to prejudice against women. She was not allowed to exhibit at one gallery because she was a female and received little recognition until the 2000s. She did not sell a painting until she was 89 and did not gain acknowledgement until 2009, when a large exhibition of her work was held in the United Kingdom. The idea of the concept of the art becoming more important than the art itself became its own movement in the late 60s. In conceptual art, the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all of the planning and decisions are made beforehand, and execution is a perfunctory affair. Conceptual art can be and can look like almost anything. This is because, unlike a painter or sculptor who will think about how best they can express their idea using paint or sculptural materials and techniques, a conceptual artist uses whatever materials and whatever form is most appropriate to putting their ideas across. This could be anything from a performance to a written description. The artist Lydia Benglis, trained as a painter in the abstract expressionist movement and raised in Louisiana, moved to New York in 1964. She said, "I wasn't breaking away from painting, but trying to redefine what it was." Benglis admired the gestural style of that older generation of artists, but quickly began to adapt their methods to more extravagant ends. She invented a new format with her celebrated pours, which resembled paintings but came off the wall to occupy the space of the sculpture. Benglis's interest in gendered stereotypes extends to her pioneering videos. Works like Female Sensibility and Now play freely with arousal and submission, and questioned the role of the woman artist at the height of the feminist movement. In the 70s, a body of art movements sought to contradict some aspects of modernism, or some aspects that emerged or developed in its aftermath. In general, movements such as intermedia, installation art, conceptual art, and multimedia, particularly involving video, are described as postmodern. The characteristics of postmodern art are that the use of text was prominent as the central artistic element, collage, simplification, appropriation, performance art, and the recycling of past styles and themes in a modern day context. Barbara Kruger, born in 1945, was an American conceptual artist and collagist associated with the pictures generation. She is known for her collage style that consists of black and white photographs overlaid with declarative captions, stated in white on red fuchsia bold oblique or Helvetica ultra condensed text. The phrases in her works often addressed cultural constructions of power, identity, consumerism, and sexuality. Kruger's artistic mediums include photography, sculpture, graphic design, architecture, as well as video and audio installations. Barbara was also considered one of the artists in the feminist movement, referring to the ideology and social movements advocating for women's equality. The feminist movement gained popularity in the early 20th century, moving through Europe to the United States and becoming synonymous with the women's movement. The 1970s consciousness raising challenged the status quo, demanding the art world to change the inequality of art. A core part of the feminist art movement was to challenge the domination of male artists to gain recognition and equality for women artists. An anonymous artist group of activists called the Guerrilla Girls formed in 1985. They used disruptive headlines, outrageous visuals, and statistics. to expose gender and ethnic bias and corruption in art, film, politics, and pop culture. They've done hundreds of projects, from street posters, banners, actions, books, and videos all over the world, and are still active in their work. Their work is currently on display at Tate Modern. One of their most prominent posters was one with the statistic: less than 5% of the artists in the modern art sections are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. It stated, "Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum?" Meanwhile, in Britain in 1988, a group of young artists held two pop up exhibits: Freeze in 1988 and Sensation in 1997. The art differed from the traditional, as artists used unusual materials and sometimes shocking images. The art was distinctive and almost notorious. The negative coverage by the English press gained them publicity. Stylistically, the artists used ideas from minimalism and conceptualism. However, they frequently incorporated the darker properties of modern life. Some artists used found materials. Others employed video, film, printmaking, paint, or photography. And others fashioned extensive installations. The artists created a reputation for doing whatever they wanted with whatever materials they chose, which was not always acceptable as an idea to many in the art world. One of these young British artists was Rachel Whiteread, born in Essex, England. Her mother was an artist and her father a teacher, and her first education was at Cyprus College of Art, followed by the Slade School of Art, where she studied sculpture. She was part of the young British artist's second show, Sensation. Most of her works are based on ordinary objects she casts. She constructs sculptures from small elements to entirely cast buildings. One of her major outdoor works is the Judenplatz Holocaust Memorial in Vienna. Another international art movement that took place in the late 70s was Neo-Expressionism. It was a reaction to the intellectualized and abstract art of the 70s and was characterized by a return to figural representation, raw brushstrokes, and emotional expressionism. Neo-expressionists returned to portraying recognizable objects, such as the human body, although sometimes in an abstract manner, in a rough and violently emotional way, often using vivid colors. Leiko Ikamura was a Japanese-Swiss artist who worked in a variety of mediums, including oil painting, sculpture, and watercolor. She studied at Osaka University, majoring in Spanish, and then left Japan to study in Spain at the Academia de Bellas Artes in Granada and Seville. She moved to Zurich to pursue a career as an artist and had her first solo exhibition in a public installation, which took place in 1983 in Bonn, Germany. She had her first solo exhibition in a public institution, which took place in 1983 in Bonn, Germany. She began experimenting with mediums such as bronze and ceramic and became a professor of painting at the University of the Arts in Berlin in 1991. Her work spans a variety of mediums, from drawing to painting to sculpture and video. In 1974, a loose affiliation of artists influenced by conceptual and pop art utilized appropriation and montage to reveal the constructed nature of images. Experimenting with a variety of media, including photography and film, their works exposed cultural tropes and stereotypes in popular imagery. Though many artists in this group were trained formally in traditional disciplines such as painting and sculpture, they elected to utilize their skills in unorthodox ways, re-examining composition, particularly within popular image production, and the picture generation was born. Sarah Charlesworth was an American conceptual artist and photographer, born in New Jersey. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Barnard College, and her undergraduate thesis project was a work of conceptual art devoid of text. It was a 50-print study of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. After completing her degree, she briefly studied under the photographer Lisette Model at the New School. After college, she worked as a freelance photographer and became active in downtown Manhattan art circles. In her series, Renaissance Paintings and Renaissance Drawings, both from 1991, Charlesworth combined imagery from disparate Italian Renaissance paintings and drawings to make new, often ironic paintings and drawings, and her work is included in the collections of many museums from around the world. The international borrowing, copying, and alteration of existing images and objects is called appropriation. It's a strategy used by artists for millennia, but it took on new significance in the mid-20th century. The rise of consumerism and the proliferation of images through mass media outlets, from magazines to television, particularly influenced this movement. Pop artists especially reveled in reproducing, juxtaposing, and repeating everyday images from popular culture in their work, mirroring and critiquing the ideas, desires, and cultural trends of their time. Elaine Sturtevant, born in Lakewood, Ohio, earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Ohio, followed by a master's from the Teachers College of Columbia University. In New York, she studied at the Art Students League, and her earliest work was made in New York in the late 50s. She sliced tubes of paint open, flattened them, and attached them to the canvas. In 1964, she began to manually reproduce paintings and objects created by her contemporaries from memory. After pushback for her conceptual practice in the 70s and in the 80s, she focused on the next generation of artists. She mastered painting, sculpture, photography, and film in order to produce a full range of copies of works of her chosen artists. In most cases, her decision to start copying an artist happened before those artists achieved broader recognition. One of Sturtevant's final acts of subversion was her recurring performance of a visiting artist's public lecture. The lecture was not based on any particular artist, but on the meta tropes of everything that can go wrong, and does, in a typical visiting artist's lecture. The crux of the lecture is Sturtevant's portrayal of a bitter, possibly drunk, late career artist who cannot get any of her presentation media to work properly. She has received both the Golden Lion and Kurt Schwitzer's Prize Awards for Lifetime Achievement. The common idiom, to take to the streets, has been used for years to reflect a diplomatic arena for people to protest, riot, or rebel. Early graffiti writers of the 1960s and 70s co-opted this philosophy as they began to tag their names across urban landscapes of New York City, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. A central aspect of street art is its ephemerality. Any unsanctioned public work runs the risk of being removed or painted over by authorities or by other artists. No one can own it or buy it. Viewers are seeing a one-of-a-kind work that is likely not to last. Street art can often be viewed as a tool for promoting an artist's personal agenda surrounding contemporary social concerns, with city facades acting in the same role as the old-fashioned soapbox. Many artists use public canvases of buildings, bridges, lampposts, underpasses, ditches, sidewalks, walls, and benches. Street art's status as vandalism often eclipses its status as art. More recently, though, many artists are finding more opportunities to create artworks in sanctioned situations, by showing in galleries and museums or by partnering with organizations that offer outdoor public spaces in which street artists are permitted to execute works. Maya Hayek, born in 1969 in Baltimore, Maryland, received a BFA in 1991 from Massachusetts College of Art and Design and studied at the University of Odessa in Ukraine and at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. She is best known for the bold geometric patterns she employs in large-scale murals. She gathers her inspiration from Sayanka, mandalas, chandeliers, views from the Hubble telescope, holograms, Rorschach tests, and the surrounding environment. A style of art that often gets overlooked as an official movement in art is the concept of manga and anime. Originating in Japan, it's based on early Japanese styles. Manga may appear as comics or cartoons and printed in magazines and books, and published manga stories are generally drawn in black and white, although some artists do incorporate colors. Anime is closely associated with manga, anime being based on either hand drawn or computer generated styles of animation. Many manga books and comics were transformed into anime images and animated in games or videos. Initially, most manga comics were made by men and based on shonen manga subjects. At the beginning of the 70s, a group of female artists called the Year 24 began creating shoujo manga to expand the themes and add complexity and social constructs to the artwork. There are many prominent female manga and anime artists that have created works that you might recognize yourself. Rumiko Takahashi created the anime and manga that it was based off of, Inuyasha. Hiromu Arakawa created the manga and anime Full Metal Alchemist. And Naoko Takeuchi, and I apologize if I am butchering these names, was born in Japan. Part of astronomy and manga clubs in high school. Naoko studied chemistry at the university and graduated with a degree in it and became a licensed pharmacist in Japan. After graduating, Takeuchi submitted some work to a publisher who printed it. She received an award for the Best New Artist for her initial submission. Her series, Sailor Moon, was an immediate success, and the series has been widely printed and made into movies, video games, and even stage musicals. Sailor Moon is one of the most popular and well-liked manga series. Starting in the 1950s, digital art was a new and not widely understood form of art. The first use of the term digital art wasn't until the early 80s, when computer engineers devised a paint program which was used by the pioneering digital artist Harold Cohen. Digital art can be computer generated, scanned, or drawn using a tablet or mouse. And in the 1990s, improvements in digital technology made it possible to download videos onto computers, allowing artists to manipulate the images they had filmed. This gave artists new creative freedom. Digital art has exploded into today. Digital paintings and illustrations, video editing, video game design, graphic design, and so much more has become not just a form of expression, but for many has become a creative career path. Natasha Chomko, also known as Postwook, is a digital artist based in Los Angeles. She mainly focuses on surreal landscapes, collage art with refined, visionary, and psychedelic elements. She picked up collage in 2007 and completed a BA in political science. She's a self taught artist who never intended to become a professional, but has achieved great success and become well known with her individual style. Art of all types has become such a grand and expansive form of expressing yourself, of creating a living for yourself, of telling the history of your life and the world. And it is so exciting that more and more now we are able to go back into the history and find cases and stories of artists who weren't known before. And we get to learn from them, learn from their experiences, relate to their stories and learn from their techniques and see that sometimes it takes a long time or um, takes going from one career path to another to find your successes or to find your passions. And it's so exciting to have been able to go all the way back in time with you all to explore and get to know these women, these artists, and this history so much better. So, thank you so much for joining me on this journey through time and exploring the world of art a bit deeper with me. I hope I did not bore you with all of the art history talk, which I understand. I had art history classes in college that I had to take, and they were my least favorite. But I hope I was able to make it exciting and a little bit fun for you. Just a reminder that if you really want to get to know these artists a little bit better and see more of their work, I have created some guidebooks to go along with this podcast series that has short snippets of each era and explaining a little bit about the different time periods as well as the specific women I talked about with some images of their artwork, as well as lists some women that I found in my research that I did not talk about today. So you can find that on my Patreon over at the Julianet Studios Patreon under Candid Canvas Crew, or in the shop to buy them individually. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to continue talking to you about all things creativity and art. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube, and over on Instagram at Candid Canvas Pod. Thank you so much. Until next time.